It's our 12th week in our series, and we are in Vermont, and I will be spotlighting the disappearance of Patricia Hesse. Patricia, 34, vanished from her apartment in Rutland on November 9th, 1981, and her sister Pamela was the charging force in her investigation. Pamela believed she knew who was responsible for her sister's disappearance, but as of November, it will be 44 years since Patricia vanished, and there have never been any charges in her case, and there are now no family members left to advocate for Patricia. We don't know much about Patricia's life leading up to her disappearance, but what we do know is that there is so much loss and grief along the way. Patricia had two siblings, a brother named Gary and a sister named Pamela. Sadly, Gary would pass away from a car accident in 1969. Patricia was deeply in love with her boyfriend, but unfortunately he would commit suicide in the 70s, and her sister Pamela said she was still distraught over his death leading up to her disappearance. Patricia went on to graduate college, but she stayed close at home, living with her parents until they passed away in the late 70s. In 1981, Patricia was now renting an apartment in a house in Davis Street in Rutland, and she had been living there for about 3 years since her mother passed away. On November 9th, 1981, Patricia decided to go shopping at the Rutland Mall, where she purchased a $200 fur coat. From there, it was determined that Patricia headed back to her apartment and began preparing dinner. Later that evening, the landlord would enter Patricia's home to find food burning on the stove, along with food that was already prepared and the table set for a meal, but Patricia was nowhere to be found. Patricia's sister Pamela would go to the police the next morning to report her sister missing, but she was told by a police officer that she had to wait at least 48 hours before Patricia would be considered missing, since she was an adult. When those 2 days had passed and Patricia was nowhere to be found, police began investigating, but stated that they didn't believe a crime was committed and they didn't suspect foul play. Investigators asked Pamela if there was anything missing from the apartment, and she said she didn't notice anything missing and that the fur coat her sister had just purchased was still hanging in the closet. It seems like from the jump, investigators didn't believe that this was anything more than a person who chose to walk away from their own life. Pamela would tell the Rutland Daily Herald 2 years later that she was investigating her sister's disappearance on her own and was convinced that Patricia had been murdered and she knew who was responsible. Pamela says she gave evidence to the police even though she knew it wasn't strong enough to hold up in court, telling the Daily Herald, quote, "I've obviously let someone get away with something, but there's nothing I can do about it," end quote. Despite whatever Pamela gave investigators, they still continued to tell her that there was no evidence of foul play in her sister's case. Patricia's case has received little to no media coverage from the beginning. There are very few articles available in the archives, and they are very short. Patricia's case was mentioned in the news in April of 1987 when remains were found close to where Patricia lived, but it was determined that those remains belonged to another missing woman that had vanished in 1983. There have been no updates reported in Patricia's case, and sadly, Pamela passed away at the age of 54 in a motorcycle accident in 2005. Pamela did have a son, but he was convicted for murdering his father, so there is no one currently in Patricia's family left to advocate for her. Please keep sharing her face in her case so that she is not lost to time. For reference, at the time of Patricia's disappearance, she was 5'1", weighing around 110 pounds, had long blonde hair and blue eyes, and was likely wearing a long gray trench coat and carrying a black purse. If you have any information in Patricia's disappearance, please contact the Rutland Police Department at 802-773-1816. Remember to share those missing and murder cases you see online, because every time we share a face, we do get closer to solving a case. And I will see you all back here tomorrow for day 2 in Vermont.